right, hi and welcome everybody to the next talk. As I never remember if I simply do not remember if I submitted for the English only track or for some other track, I will continue in English and do the whole talk in English then, assuming that maybe somebody is listening who does not understand German, and then yeah, it's better this way. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat. I have to admit, I will not see your questions until the end of the talk, but I will try to understand them. You can ask your questions in English or German. I will translate them. So however you feel better, ask your questions then. But again, as I'm looking on a different screen right now, I will not see your questions until the end of the talk, but I hope we'll have some time to answer all of them later. All right, then welcome to my talk, Astonishing Value of Speed, or why you cannot afford not to go fast in IT. Just to set expectations for a second, this is sort of a why talk. Why does it make sense to go fast? It's not a how talk, so how to implement that. How to implement that, it would be hours or even days to go through all of this. And we've got about 45 minutes for this talk. And therefore, I will not dive into that. The good thing about the how is everything which you need to implement that is already there. So everything is described. You just have to implement that. I mean, just with some quotes, but still, it would be straightforward. All the material is available. The problem that I usually see why people are not doing it is because they do not understand why it makes sense. So what's the point in doing that? Why is there an advantage in going fast? And what does it mean? And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next 45 minutes. So if you're more into how to talk right now, so getting instructions how to use X or something like that, or implement Y, maybe that's the right time to switch tracks. Okay, for everybody who's still here, my name is Uwe Friedrichsen. I'm working as CTO at Codecentric, and yeah, there are some more ways to reach me. So you can reach me via Twitter. There are my slide decks. Also, this slide deck in the unabridged form you will find on Speaker Deck. It's a little bit longer version that's on Speaker Deck, but still you get all the information here. And you also can read some stuff at my personal blog at ufried.com, also about this talk here. All right. So much for the beginning. Let's get started. Going fast. Yeah. But if you think about going fast, then two questions immediately come up. So what does going fast actually mean, and how fast is fast? Let's start with the first one. And if you talk about going fast, most people think about velocity, output, throughput, features per unit in time. So how much do you get done per hour, day, or something like that? And probably many people, when they read my talk title, think, oh dear, there's another guy who tries to tell us that we have to run the rat race even faster than we already do. And just to be totally clear, I'm not talking about that. So going fast is not running faster. Okay, but what is going fast then? So what does speed mean? And if people think about that, then after a while, quite a lot of them think, well, maybe you're talking about deployment frequency, how often we deploy to production. By the way, it's important that we talk about deployments to production, not to a dev stage or a QA stage, because software turns into value in production. And not before. So how often do we deploy in production? And some other, not so many people, they say, maybe you talk about cycle times, or if they come from a Kanban background, about, they said, lead times. So how long does it take until an idea that I have go through the whole IT value chain until it's in production? The user, the customers, sees a result and can provide feedback. I call it cycle times because I'm interested in the whole loop. So from an idea to the user, back the feedback, so that I can learn how good the idea was. But it's also perfectly timed if you talk about lead times. So from idea to the user through the whole IT value chain. Okay. And if I talk about speed or fast, I refer to cycle times. How long does it take until the user sees my idea that I had before? So deployment frequency simply must not come into the way. I mean, if you have a deployment, if you deploy every 6 months or so, you will never be able to have cycle times of 3 days. Not possible. Okay, so if I talk about going fast, I talk about cycle times. But how fast is fast? I mean, so how long should it take? And if I talk about fast, I mean the delivery speed and the quality of the elite performers of the State of DevOps report. And if you look into the State of DevOps report, what we can see there is here, lead time for changes, less than 1 day. Intraday lead times. You also see above that deployment frequency is also fast enough. And the blue ones in the lower part of the image, these are the quality metrics that try to make sure that you not only go fast, but you also go fast and still do a good job. I mean, going fast and messing everything up, that's not hard. Going fast and producing quality, that's the actual challenge here. One more word about lead time for changes. If you read the fine print, you will see that what they measured here is the time from commit to production, to going live. And you might say, well, that's not what you were talking about. That's just CI/CD basically. So continuous delivery, continuous deployment. And well, that's right and not right, because what they tried to measure actually was what I was talking about, from the idea to the user. The problem they had when they tried to evaluate the information was that they had such a big variance on the first part of the value chain, so from the idea to the commit, that it really killed them, that they didn't get any information out of that. And therefore they said, okay, let's use a proxy metric. From commit to production, we have a lot less variance on that part. And here we get reasonable and sensible results that we can extract from all the information that we gathered. And so actually what they really want to optimize is the whole value chain, from the idea to the user. That's very important to understand, because I hear a lot of misunderstandings about that part. Okay, let's say less than 1 day for lead time. And well, yeah, come on, forget that. That's maybe a handful of internet unicorns in Silicon Valley. So that's nothing that's really relevant for us. And I said, no. I mean, this was the 2019 State of DevOps report. That's 2 years ago. It was the last one where Nicole Fortran, Jess Humble, and Gene Kim, the originators of the report and the later authors of the book Accelerate, where they wrote down their experience from the whole State of DevOps report journey they had went through, which they still conducted, was the last one they conducted. Then later another team took over. And even 2019, 20% of all participants were elite performers. And they had thousands of companies who submitted their data, who participated in that survey. I think overall there were more than 20,000 companies who participated in their surveys. And 30% of the companies were from Europe. So it's not just a handful of unicorns in Silicon Valley. It's a significant amount of companies who are there. And I just saw the numbers of the 2021 report. Right now we are up to, I think that even more, 27% elite performers and more than 40% high performers. So we're almost at 70% elite and high performers right now. So yeah, there's something going on. And yeah, so I talk about cycle times, ideally intraday cycle times, or maybe a day or two or something like that. And once in a while, I talk to an IT decision maker about that topic too. And typical reaction that I get there is then, we don't need that. Yeah, our deployment frequency could go up a little bit. We're right now at every 3 months. Every month would be nice, but cycle times never were an issue. Why should we care about that now? And that's then when I say, yeah, well, okay, but what about post-industrial markets? Post what? Okay, a little bit of explanation. I mean, if I would really dive into a story from pre-industrial, industrial, post-industrial markets and how they evolved and all that, would be a whole talk in it itself. And we don't have the time for that. So let's cut down to the gist of the talk, or to not the top, this other talk or this topic. And this is comparing industrial markets, industrial production methods with post-industrial ones. And if you take away all the layers and go down to the foundations of industrial production, post-industrial production, you will find one very important property where everything else is built upon. And that is the ratio of demand and supply. In the industrial market, demand is a lot higher than supply. At least that's the assumption that you have. Hopefully it's also reality. But you assume that demand is a lot higher than supply, which, by the way, was true for industrial markets for a very long time. So it was a predominant paradigm of the last century, and therefore we have so much of that. And this has a lot of consequences, like if demand is a lot higher than supply, then the supplier dictates market evolution, which usually creates a slow market where the supplier dictates how fast progress happens. Your success certainty as a supplier is high because there's a lot of demand and you have long refinance periods so that you can make your investments and polish your product and get it ready so that it's perfectly shining and then release it because you have all time in the world to refinance your investments. So your basic strategy that you're usually using is then you try to produce as much as possible, as cost efficiently as possible, because people are more or less guaranteed to buy, and the more cost efficient you can produce, the higher your margin is. Perfectly valid strategy in that context. Post-industrial is a very different basic characteristic because the ratio reversed. Now, the post-industrial market supply is a lot higher than demand, which, by the way, is true for most markets these days. So, and if supply is a lot higher than demand, it basically changes everything. So now market is driven by the consumers and their ever-changing needs and demands, which creates a very dynamic and fast markets where those companies who adapt to the ever-changing needs and demands of the consumers best drive the competition. Your success certainty is very low right now, because why should consumers buy your product? I mean, they have a plethora of options where they can buy. So you have to convince them to buy your product. And that's not a simple deal. And also your refinancing period becomes very short. So you cannot polish your product until it's really shining and then release it, because the moment you release it, the next one will try to oust you with their product. And so the strategy is very different. That is preferable in such a context, which is that you try to get very fast feedback from your consumers. Is it this what you like? Is it this what you like? And then adapt to that and be very flexible and lightweight and not scaling in a cost-efficient way. So summing that up, the post-industrial market, not those companies thrive who produce as cost efficiently as possible, but those who adapt to the ever-changing needs and demands of the customers faster than their competitors. And this means you always have to go to your customers and have fast feedback loops with them to be able to adapt to the ever-changing needs. Says the decision maker. That's nice. You were talking market, even if you're an IT guy, but we're talking IT right now. So what does that stuff have to do with IT? Well, that would be another longer story from the beginning of commercial software development to today and how all the conditions changed and so on. But again, we don't have time for that. So let's go down to the gist. And the gist is, what's the role of IT today? And IT today basically is the nervous system of every non-trivial company. The whole business DNA of a company is encoded in your IT systems. I mean, that's the basic idea of this whole digitization or digital transformation, where what people always talk about and rarely know what it means. It goes along for more than 40 years right now in several waves. It means that IT has become an integral part of all your business processes. It also means that, meanwhile, IT basically has become an integral part of your user interfaces and user interactions, your customer interactions, basically. It also means that IT has become an integral part of many business models. And if you think it through, you will understand that IT will enable very new business models and even create new types of markets that are still unthinkable right now. That's digital transformation in a nutshell. And also IT is an integral part, or basically the way how you get feedback from your customers these days. You remember this whole cycle time loops. You have an idea, it goes out to the customer, and you want to get feedback from the customers. It also works with IT. So IT is everywhere. And that not only means that you need IT to run your business, it also means that you need IT to change your business. These days, you cannot change anything in the business without touching your IT. It's simply not possible. And this also means that IT delimits the change the change speed of IT delimits how fast you can get feedback from your customers, how often you can ask questions to your customers, and now we're at cycle times. So also to wrap that up is, and that's for me, one of the core messages is, today business and IT are the same side of the same coin. And the other side is the market. So all these companies who are still talking about business IT alignment, I always ask them, where have you been the last 20 years? You should be there. You should have understood that IT and business are inseparable today, that they're the same thing. And the decision maker listens to that, thinks for a moment, and then answers with a light smile. But my market is not post-industrial. Well, that's the point where it becomes futile to continue this discussion if they're post-industrial or not. Maybe they just want to stay in their illusionary bubble. Maybe they're right. But in the end, it doesn't matter, because even if that's not a point, there's a lot more value in going fast. For instance, if we go back to the State of DevOps report. Go through the management summary. Here are some findings in here. So our highest performers are twice as likely to meet or exceed their organizational performance goals. What? Sounds interesting and very nice to have. Also here, it can drive improvements in work-life balance and reductions in burnout, which I find very interesting. And again, so it drives speed and stability, as well as reductions in burnout. So if we sum that up, what they figured out in the State of DevOps report is that shorter cycle times do not lead to more stress and chaos as most people would naively think in the beginning, but on the contrary, to less stress and higher performance. So it's exactly the opposite from what you would expect. And this alone should be worth aiming for short cycle times. Well, our decision maker is still not completely convinced. It's okay. It's a report. I mean, there's a lot of evidence for what's in there, but it's fair if that person's not convinced. But there are even more advantages, a lot more advantages, because going fast provides you with a lot of options that you do not have if you do not go fast. So it creates a very different situation in IT for you, where you can do things that you're simply not able to do if you have these long lead times or long cycle times. So I will talk about 7 of these advantages here. So first thing is, it's quite obvious, if you really want to go fast intraday cycle times, you need to automate. You need to automate every routine task that's out there, because otherwise you're not able to go that fast on the long run. And this has a lot of additional effects. If you automate every routine task, it means that a lot less errors happen, that people are happier, that there are also more capacity left for valuable work and not for routine work, which the machine can take over. And so you get more done with the same and, hey, happier people. So nice effect. Okay, that one was obvious. But it also can help you to simplify your processes a lot. Because if you try to go fast, you assign value to duration, to speed. And this is a big game changer in your process design, because it ruthlessly points out waste. Before going fast, everything was just about avoiding errors, or actually reducing the probability of having errors in any way. Errors was everything. Avoid errors, because errors cost money and you try to produce as cost efficiently as possible. I mean, also IT was and still is in many companies in an industrial production mode. So, and the problem with that is that often in such setting where you don't have this counter force here, speed, things try to get bloated and become an end in itself. So it's quite often very hard to say, well, does that still create enough value for the effort, or doesn't it? Because this person on the other side on the table simply says, yeah, it reduces the probability and therefore it's good and therefore it's done, because you don't have any reason not to do it. And that creates often situations with process, because every black swan you ever happen to meet is then included in the processes, and a lot of stuff is in there, because it could be that, well, you know it from your own company probably. But if you add focus on cycle times, you put a value on speed. So speed is on the same level as in importance as error avoidance. And now you have these counter forces, and you have to ask a different question. this takes a long time. Does it create enough value to be worth it? And quite often the answer will be no. You will figure out different ways to say, okay, I just do 10% of it and still get more than 90% of the value, which is good enough for me because I'm faster. Or I can completely drop it because it has become an end in itself. Or I figure out a very different way how to tackle that, which is a lot faster and a lot simpler and still creates the same value. And. So you start to focus on purpose and value if you really start to focus on cycle times. And you're not going with routines and habits and we always did it this way or something like that. So helps you to, or gives you the option to reduce the complexity of your processes, to simplify your processes. But it's not only for processes, it also works for the whole application landscape. You can simplify your application landscape a lot with going faster. So for instance, if you think about configurations in enterprise systems, quite often configuration management is up to 50% of the overall complexity of an application, of a solution that you have in place. There are all these different execution paths and decision logic. So if config parameter A is this way and config parameter B is that way, then execute this branch with all the logic, otherwise execute that branch with all the logic, and otherwise, and blah, 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 blah. And you also have to manage all the config parameters and make them accessible at runtime. And so it's a huge overhead that you have in there, huge surplus of complexity, simply driven by configuration parameters. And we all know that complexity comes at a price. Your code is harder to read, to understand, harder to test and debug. So your changes become slower and more expensive, more bugs creep in, and eventually robustness in production tends to go down because there are more bugs. But if you step back step or three, and you look at this, you see that most of these configuration options are only needed due to the long lead times that you have. Story goes like the business department comes to IT and says, well, we need a change in behavior in that system. How long does it take? And IT then do a little bit of calculations, say, yeah, well, 10 months. And they said, wow, we need it next week. No way, even if we do it really fast, it will take 7 months. And so what business departments learn, whenever they might need to change anything in the system behavior, they have to make it configurable upfront and let all options be coded into the solutions, which creates a lot of complexity. Now, what if the lead times were a lot shorter than the time span they expect? So if they come to us the next time, say, well, we need a little change in behavior here. How long does it take? And you would answer, well, how about this afternoon? So they would learn, okay, it's fast enough. It's okay. So we don't have to load up the solutions with all these configuration options just in case that I might need something because IT is too slow. So most of the configuration options that are built on the complex solutions would not be needed anymore. Makes solutions simpler, saves time, money, improves robustness, because every complexity that we can avoid is good in our systems. To be fair, we will not get rid of all configurations. There will still be configuration parameters left, of course, because some of the configuration parameters are not related to that problem. But we would get rid of quite some of the parameters, and we would get rid of quite a bit of complexity in our solutions, and that's a good thing. because our solutions are overly complex anyway, and everything we can simplify is good. So we can simplify processes and we can simplify our solutions by going fast, by short cycle times. We even can simplify organizations if we want to. So because these long lead times, they result in an always existing huge backlog. We have these long running projects usually where we currently work in IT at our current batch of changes. And while we're working on that for a long time, we can't accept new changes, but the world around us still changes. There will be new requirements, demands, needs, ideas that need to be implemented and so on. And so all these ideas and demands and requirements pile up at our front door. And yeah, way too much then when we open the door the next time that we could say, oh, well, let's pick the next one and then the next one and the next one, because well, we need a more complex organization to handle this huge backlog that's always there. And so we create this complex project organization where we bundle all these things in projects and have this budgeting processes and prioritization and approval and setting up and staffing and so on, because it's always a scarcity management, basically, because there's always these huge backlog and everybody's fighting to get that job done. And because that's so complex, this project organization, which we build on top of our organizational structure, we also need a minimum project size, which often works as a reinforcing loop. And yeah, well, so we are where we are. But again, what if it wouldn't take a year to implement an idea, but maybe 8 hours, 6 hours, even 2 days. So it would allow to organize very differently, because right now you wouldn't have this huge backlog all the time. You could more work in a flow-like style, basically, where you could say, okay, what's here? Or okay, and that takes the next one. So you always would be able to keep the queue short, which allows for very different ways of organizing. You could even get rid of the whole project organization and use just your organizational structure to create stable teams, which in a simple way can handle all these different requests. Just to be frank, it's not as simple as I said here, do one big Kanban board for all requests. It's a little bit more complicated, of course. So for instance, Klaus Leopold in his book, Rethinking Agile, describes some things that you need to take care of to really go fast in such a setting. But still, it would be a lot simpler and a lot less effort than going with this complex project organization on top. And because everything's faster, everybody would be more relaxed. So yeah, nice option. It's not only that we can get rid of the project organization, it also has some additional surpluses. For instance, here's one: we could get rid of these emergency task forces. I mean, with this project organization, we always have the splitting in project and maintenance, with long running projects for the new functionality, and then maintenance supporting production, taking care of bugs, small changes, a flow style approach. And as some strange law, it seems that usually the experienced engineers are always assigned to projects. So, and if you did something wrong in your previous life, you get assigned to maintenance or something like that. I haven't understood it completely, but always the most experienced engineers you find in the project organization and not in the maintenance organization. So you have a setting like that. So several projects with several senior people, and then you have a maintenance team, mostly not that senior people, maybe one or something like that. And in such a setting, then this serious production error occurs. Here, Production comes along and says, yeah, well, we've got a serious production problem here. And then the maintenance team looks at that and says, oh, whoa, well, yeah, it's a problem. And yeah, that's intricate. And we have no idea how to fix that. And that's when this emergency task force is set up then. So what they're doing is they put together all the people from the different teams or the experts and create a temporary project organization on top of the project organization, on top of the organizational structure. And the good part of the story is, yeah, well, this group is able to fix the bug. But if you take a closer look, we see, well, if you take the top performers from project team, productivity goes down quite a lot. So it's not just, okay, there are 10 people, one is out, and therefore we are down to 90% of the productivity. If the team consists of 10 people and we take out the top performers, probably productivity goes down to 40%. And if we take out the two top performers, productivity goes down to 10% or something like that. That's usually what we see in reality. And so, yeah, we have lots of cribbled productivity here, mostly standing still there, mostly standing still there. And we have the additional overheads for the temporal project organization. And many companies, if they're honest, they say, well, we do not dare to admit, but that happens more frequently than we would like to admit. And it often takes several days. So this means a lot of production loss, including stress for the people, because of all this overhead and stuff and procedures. Now let's go back to the organization with intraday cycle times. Here's a setting where we have different teams working on parts of the system landscape. Then there are other options how we can organize that, but let's assume that one. And we have this production error again. Now, well, something blows up here. Say, yeah, something blew up. And next one looks and says, yeah, oh yeah, it's really blew up. We have to look into that. So let's create another ticket or our flow style board and yeah, start swarming on that. And they have everything in their team to solve that issue, everyone. So what we can observe here is that we don't need any extra organization and overheads and additional procedures and so on. It can all be solved in the normal way, just adding a high priority ticket into their system, and the rest of the organization is not affected, basically. So it not only simplifies the organizational structure or the whole your whole organization, it even creates more productivity and reduces stress and saves money this way, of course. So because errors become just another task. Okay, so we can simplify a lot of things, and we can even make sure, that's number 6, the second last one, if we can make sure that we create a lot more outcome, so that we do not waste so much money on tasks that are actually do not create any value. In long-running projects, some surveys and studies figured out that most of the time is not used there. Most of the code is not used there. Most of the code produced in the systems is not used. So maybe around 20% are frequently used, 30% rarely used, and 50% are basically not used at all and often even disliked by the users. And there are several reasons for that. So the most important one are the 3 following reasons. The first one is requirements lose their value over time. I just recently read that 3% of all requirements became invalid every month. If you have a lead time of 12 months or longer, well, here you go. So you have a lot of requirements that are not valid anymore, not needed anymore, do not create any value anymore. Also, often business departments are fighting for a slot, or a project slot in IT. And so, and if they get a slot there, then the next 2 times or 3 times they get the answer that no, we don't sign off your project request here because now all the others have their shot, and then come back if all the others had their projects, and then you can have your next project. And so they cram everything they can think about what they might need in the next 2 or 3 years and put that into their requirements document. So it's a little bit of clairvoyance, so guessing for runaways, so advanced guessing or something game. But yeah, well, that's basically what you have. So bloated requirement documents, well, they're guessing, well, we have no idea. And also, that's number 3, they have no option to create or have real value feedback from the user, that the user sees something and can use it. I mean, you can do some little bit of experiments and tests and so on. But it's different stories. Say, would you like that if we would build that, or if it's there? And even if users say, yeah, well, I think we would like that, it is still a very different story if it's there. And then because users only decide when they see the finished result, and then they decide, yes, yeah, that's what we like. No, we don't like that. And yeah, I know that I said I didn't like that in the upfront, but now that I see it, I really like it. So you only know if you see it, and you don't have any way to get that feedback, because it takes 12 months or longer from your idea until the user can give you feedback. And so you come up with these results. If you would have intraday cycle times, it would be a different story, because now you're able to get fast feedback. You could go out to your users and say, well, here's this big epic, 500,000 euro worth, and I slice it down to one little implementation part and say, maybe costing 10,000 euros, say, hey, do you like that? And then by the responses, by measuring how users respond to that, you see, oh, well, no, they do not respond to that. So, oh, maybe I asked the question wrong. So let's change that a little bit. I'll try it again. Oh, do you like that? I still don't like it. Maybe it wasn't that good idea. So 480,000 euros saved. Let's try the next day. Oh, they like that one, and so on. And so you can reduce all this idle performance and all this value reducing performance very early on the run, and only focus on these ideas that really create value. Helps you to get more done, happier people. I mean, it's a lot more fun working in such a setting where you immediately get feedback for what you have implemented the last day. I mean, it's a very different story from, well, here's this long backlog, take the next item. Yeah, well, I implemented an item. Wow, what took you so long? And now start with the next item. A lot more fun working such a setting. And of course, if you want to have something like business agility, what many leaders are currently talking about, it only works if IT is also fast. Because if you have 12 months lead times, well, good luck with business agility, because you will ask one question every 12 months, because IT and business are the same side of the same coin, and the other side is the market. So maybe first reduce your cycle times and then think about business agility. These were 7 options and 7 advantages that you can get from going fast. There would be a lot more what we could talk about, but yeah, we run out of time. So if you go back to the decision maker last time, probably get something like, yeah, I think about that. Yeah. Oh, that's okay. It's not important to say, yeah, I'm convinced, and something like that, because now the why starts to sink in. And then probably a while later, the actions will start. And that's where we come into play. Okay, summing up. Going fast has a value. It's not an end in itself. So simply accelerating is not just something you should do just for its own sake. It creates a lot of options that you do not have if you do not go fast, if you have long cycle times. It helps you in highly dynamic markets. It helps you to simplify your processes, your IT landscape, your organization. So creates the prerequisites you need for that, which helps you to leverage cost savings, to improve your productivity, to create a more simplified and more robust IT landscape. And very important, it creates an environment where it's a lot more fun to work in, and it reduces burnout probability a lot. And that's really great thing. Again, there are more things we could talk about, but overall, I would say, I think there's no real alternative to going fast. So, yeah, well, okay, we're waiting for our decisions makers, of course, but maybe I gave you some ideas to ponder, or maybe for your next discussion with your decision maker. And maybe you also get them thinking, and maybe we are all able together to create a world where it's a lot more fun to work in as developers. So that's what I had for you. And now I think we have still some minutes for questions. So now I will step to the chat and see what's in there. All right, so you can, literature, how to implement that. I mean, if you start to implement that, there, for instance, I mean, the basics you find in the Accelerate book from Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, and Jean Kim, where they wrote down all their findings, and they have a lot of pointers what you can do and how you can start and what's a good things to work with. What I also would recommend then is, let me think, for going faster. Of course, you will, at one point in time, you will have to automate your pipeline from production to from commit to production. So yeah, well, CI/CD, and we all know there are some books there, and there's a lot of literature out there, and because most companies, they have a CI/CD pipeline to the dev environment, but we need more of that. And for the rest, it becomes a little bit trickier because, as I said, Klaus Leopold has some good ideas in his book, Rethinking Agile. So how to set up this part of the IT value chain from I have an idea until the commit and what's needed there. And then maybe one evergreen for creating production-ready software, because we also do not need to compromise our the quality of the software we release. Maybe Release It from Michael Nygaard as a great book, which has a lot of good and actionable advice how to create production-ready software, which is an important part in here, because if you really want to go fast, you have to get your stuff. You have to have your stuff set up and know how to create good software and not figure out your way to that. Any more questions at the moment? If you don't have any questions anymore right now, and tonight you say, oh, well, I should have asked that to Uwe, then ping me at Twitter, Ufried, and then can come back to, yeah, there's one more. Looking at the software delivery performance metrics from Google, do I have to be elite in every category? I assume it would be bad if I'm able to deploy within hours, but cannot roll back that fast. I would recommend an approach where quality and speed improve alike, basically on the same way, because exactly, if you only focus on going fast without having set up the rest that I can deal with, the change failure rate or anything like that, you will run into severe problems. Because as I said in the beginning, going fast and doing a crappy job, that's very easy. We all know how to do that. The real challenge is to go fast without compromising quality. So yeah, we have to improve everything the same way. And so you have to make sure that you're able on the quality side for the next step and speed and so on, and move that way. At least that would be my very strong recommendation. All right, we are running out of time. And then thanks a lot for your time. I wish you a wonderful for the conference and a lot of exciting talks. And as I said, if you have a question you would like to ask later, then I will be I will be around for a few more minutes here, and then you will find me on Twitter and can always ask me there. That's the simplest way to contact me. Thanks a lot. Have a great time. Bye.